Thank you so much. Well, here we are talking about culture, right? And I'm actually going to warm us up because we are not in the room together, but I'm going to bring you into the technical world of sharing screens. So if you could please do me a favor, because we're going to use this throughout the lecture. If you could go to your phones and just go to that website, menti.com, and use that code. You're going to have to do this only once because then we're going to use the exact same screen. So don't close it. Menti.com, use that code, and I want to hear your voices so that we can set an expectation and an intention for what you are expecting out of today's session. I want to hear you, and this is going to help me really set the tone. Menti.com, use that code, and by the way, we see your answers in real time. You only have to enter this once. Keep it open, and we're going to use this throughout the session so that we can really share and be connected, even though we're not in the same room. I love this: inspiration, insights, guidance, direction. Gosh, the bar is set really high. We want some energy, some culture. I love it. Data and inclusion. Keep that coming. And like I said, don't close it because we're going to use it throughout the session. All right, while your words and intentions are coming on the screen, let me get back to our presentation here because a lot of people hear my introduction or ask me, how in the world did you get into this notion of cultural intelligence? And just to get the definition out of the way, and you're not going to hear me say this multiple times throughout this session, cultural intelligence can be codified in 3 action verbs. And I want us all to remember that. 3, you have the ability to be aware of, understand, and apply cultural competence and inclusive insights into your everyday decisions, into your everyday business. Now, those 3 words are key because you're aware when you see what's happening around you. I think all of us know that there's a lot happening. You go into understanding when you double click and go deeper into the data and the insights and the diagnosis. I know many of you have been working through this as part of this program. But the rubber meets the road with the application. And you'll be surprised how many people are aware and do the homework and crunch the numbers. But if it doesn't make it an embedded part of your everyday decisions, it continues to be an academic exercise. So I am here to hopefully spark the desire for action and application. And for me, it started when I landed into this country. Like Darius mentioned, I'm from Colombia. I came to the great state of Texas. It was the first place where I landed in the United States. And guess what? Right away, because I spoke Spanish, people looked at me a little bit funny. This is the early 90s. And they said, "Are you Mexican?" And I always wonder, okay, is it because they don't know anything else about other countries that also speak Spanish? And when I just said that I was from Colombia, very proudly, I always got Pablo Escobar. Now, you see what we do as human beings? We go to our lowest common denominators. Maybe some people thought that common was cute or funny. Well, it wasn't, because they just never went to coffee. Everybody knows Colombian coffee, but you see how funny we are as humans. Once again, you go into that very basic interpretation. Now, today, Colombians have it so much easier because they can call on Shakira. I didn't have Shakira back then. That was a long time ago. And thanks to Narcos, I have to explain myself all over again because of this whole drug lord tie that goes with Colombia. But this, I'm sure, has happened to many of you, depending on your background. I know the Kennedy School is a very global place. And isn't it interesting how we default to defining people based on what your interpretation of culture or not is? Thankfully, Disney is fixing it a little bit for us with Colombia and Encanto. And here we are now redefining what it is for the world. But you may be wondering, okay, Lili, that's a cute story. What does this mean? Well, I'm letting you into my own revelation of the power of inclusion and what it means in everyday business, society, entertainment, community, governments, you name it. And when I realized people just didn't see the full picture, I recognized there was an innocent cultural gap. I want to give humans the benefit of the doubt. They probably hadn't done the awareness and understanding of the power of culture. And here it is. Here's the cool thing with culture. It's all around us. Did you know that in North America, in the United States, actually, tortillas sell more than bread? Now, that is not because every Mexican American has tortillas in their fridge. It's probably because many of you have tortillas in your fridge. Culture with a mainstream impact. There are actually more Chinese restaurants in the US than there are McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chickens, Pizza Huts, and Taco Bells all combined. So there's, again, something with culture that has mass market appeal. The highest paid actress in the world is Sofia Vergara. You'll know how proud she is of her accent and everything, making $43 million a year. The other three combined that follow her on the list don't even add up to that 43 million. And still to this day, in the top 3 highest grossing revenue movies of Marvel, we have Black Panther. Now, is it because it was a great African-inspired Black movie? No, it was a great movie that was culturally done right, but the world embraced it. See, the power of inclusion. And even in music, when everybody's locked up with Spotify and they're, running in their houses, in their homes in the middle of COVID, for 2 years in a row, Bad Bunny is the most streamed artist worldwide. Now, he sings in Spanish, let me remind you. And yes, we don't talk about Bruno has beaten Frozen. We have seen it. We just saw it during the Oscars. It has passed. Let It Go as the highest charting Disney animated hit. Who knew? With all these very Latin, Colombian inspired rhythms, and every kid from every city you can imagine is saying, we don't talk about Bruno, no. I bet if you have little ones, it's stuck in your household too. So you see what happens with culture? There is power underneath those gaps. And I like to see the benefit of the doubt with culture. We can see it as this niche thing that only a few people understand. But when you look closer in the way culture, pop culture, food, and entertainment, with many times is a barometer for where the world is turning, there are cultural economics all around it because it delivers growth, impact, relevance, revenues, and much more. So there you go. That was my big aha with culture. And yes, maybe like some of you, those of you that are maybe in the corporate world, I was sitting in my corporate position, global marketing, great company like J&J, and realized, wait a second, if that's what's happening with the numbers and the shifts in culture, why are we not maybe double clicking into what that means for the way we design interventions, policies, commercial plans, the way we understand the patients that we serve, in this case at J&J for healthcare. And that sparked this notion and this feeling of intrapreneurship. Intrapreneurship is something that all of you have the capacity to turn on. You don't have to just go off and leave your corporate job or your current position to start something. It can start right there where you're at now. And we did that at J&J and created the Hispanic Employee Resource Group, me as a Latina, looking at the numbers and the shifting demographics. And all of a sudden turned it into a group that just a year ago had its 25-year anniversary. And it's recognized as a critical differentiator for innovation and growth for the business. It's not a social club, it's a business lever. Now, that made me an entrepreneur, and here I am talking to you all. Because there is something powerful when you're driven by data and inspired by culture, which is at the heart of everything that we do at CulturIntel with data and information, and at CIEN with the strategies and marketing executions for many, many companies. And we know all of that is a great story, right? And you may be thinking, okay, obviously COVID happened and the world changed. And probably even the content that you are discussing now at the Kennedy School, all the other lectures have been shaped and reformed to understand what it means now in the context of COVID. But I want us to resist the temptation to think that an inclusion, equity, and diversity discussion is happening just because of George Floyd or the inequities that we have highlighted and learned throughout COVID. By the way, not just an American thing, the health disparities we've seen everywhere around the world. And yes, many articles are kind of calling it out. Even our own HBR is saying it. Is your company actually fighting this or just talking about it? Brands, do they really have something real to say about racism? And by the way, all of that, what customers are saying, I have a higher expectation of leaders, companies, and organizations more than ever before. So all of a sudden, the scrambling started because it's no longer just corporate social responsibility, but accountability. There are so many lawsuits in the last 24 months that were never there before because of complaints about diversity. But for those of you in government, this also applies to all of you. Because just pinpointing one particular effort here in America, there is now a new website, inclusiveamerica.org, where there are pledges and plenty of data that should make your jaws drop when you realize that 93% of people running for federal government were white. Now, we're in a diverse nation, and I'll get to the numbers in a moment. And sure enough, there's been all kinds of new efforts, from executive orders to the House Office of Diversity and Inclusion, where bipartisan members are trying to figure this out. Lots of great efforts. How do we make it apply and stick, right? How do we come across as leaders in a way that it doesn't seem like a reactive compliance thing that we got to do? There was actually an HBR article that very bluntly, I was so proud of the writer, called it compliance theater. So are we here really for the compliance theater? Or why should we really do this? And it doesn't matter whether you're in the US, in Africa, in Europe, anywhere around the world. The numbers are there to back up a story that maybe needs to be elevated from regulatory and compliance and always feeling like you're having to fix something that is broken, AKA the interventions, to actually creating a higher ground because there's no other way and path for impact and growth. So I'm going to break down the fact that there were already five macro trends in motion BC, before COVID. Because right now there is this awakening, right, of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, people that didn't even have the title now has it. There's letters from CEOs and governments everywhere. We're hearing it. But I want us to know that the world was already turning in a way that it was calling and crying for inclusion as a lever for growth. Here we go with trend number one. There were already some very eminent shifting demographics. Shifting demographics worldwide, meaning when you cut the data different ways, whether it is through gender or ethnicity here in the US or worldwide, the diverse segments are those that are driving the growth. So a few data points here. 43 trillion, that is the number that represents the consumer spending controlled by women, okay? And yes, those that are in the world of marketing know that women make more than 80% of all purchasing decisions, whether it is healthcare or your kids' education, the everyday choices of the household. And that is a driver for spending, the power of the wallet, right? And it's not just that, but also in new business creation. We as women are a force to be reckoned with worldwide, with over 40% of registered businesses worldwide being women. However, when you look into how much are these women that control the power of the wallet and are driving business creation so high, how does that translate into, let's say, government contracting? And when you look at this chart, I will spare you looking at all the numbers, just that section of women-owned, you see that we represent almost 40% of all firms in America, but are barely getting 18% of the government contracts. So wait a second. If that's where the power of the wallet is and the growth outpacing new business creation, aren't we giving opportunity up by not having a fair share that is representative of those women that bring the growth? And the same thing is happening when it comes to women in government and in parliament. I'm sure in your program, you've probably seen some of this. But the global average is about 26%. Well, we're 50% of the population. But when you look at all these other numbers, there is an economic advantage for that. And it's not just the gender, there's an inclusive lens when it comes to diverse cohorts of the population. In the case of the United States, keep this number because it's so easy. 100% of our population growth is coming from diverse segments. So you tell me, whether you're running for office or looking for new funders or anything that drives growth, how in the world can you tap into growth if not addressing the portion of this chart that is driving all the growth? I mean, any Wall Street analyst will tell you the way to win, let's say, in the market is by anticipating growth trends, getting ahead of it. Well, here you have it. There's no other way to turn. Otherwise, you keep betting on a shrinking market, which is that top part. And some people may think, okay, That is the poor, disadvantaged, diverse segments. Sure. Again, let the numbers do the talking. When you understand the buying power, if it was a nation in its own, this diverse buying power, it would rank as the fourth largest economy in the world. So nowhere this is small or niche. That was the first trend, shifting demographics. There's a second one that is affecting the world everywhere. And it's the fact that we're a fast growing, aging world. When you look at it, the numbers to the bottom left, we're going from 700 million or so in 2019 of people 65 plus to about 1.5 billion by 2050. And when you look at it by region, right, whether you look at it through the cut of least developed or more developed regions, or just this cut where you see Europe, North America, Latin America, et cetera, it's a global trend. Now, you don't need master's or PhD in economics to recognize that an aging society will probably put a toll in both your workforce as well as your rising cost of healthcare. So how am I having an inclusive lens that acknowledges the dimensions of generations? And talking about generations, here we go with trend number one. Our workforce pipeline is becoming much younger. I'm starting to feel really old when I go to college campuses or I'm visiting the hardware campus right there. Just take a walk and you're like, oh my goodness, yes, Gen Zs are ruling the world. And they will continue to do so, because where else is the pipeline coming from, right? So if more than 50% of our workforce, when you're looking at just the snapshot of 2020 and keep plotting it out by 2030 is around the corner, by the way, is made up of these younger generations, then we probably need to recalibrate who makes up that pipeline so we keep it vibrant and competitive. Because when you look at the population by generation, the younger the generation, the more diverse it is. So we may get really comfortable with the boomers and the retirees to the far right, but 51% of Gen Zs are already diverse, which means this notion of the term minority, which sometimes I have like a love-hate relationship with it. It's a flawed term because it's a majority minority. And that is where the future pipeline is. Otherwise, once again, you'll be betting on a shrinking pool. Now, how are we doing? How are we doing in that workforce? When you look at critical areas like science and engineering, the gap is huge. This chart, I love it. You could probably go back and plot it in your own countries of origin. You can do it by gender, by generation, but it's population share on the left and the actual workforce on the right. And you see the gaps very easily. It's just the workforce is lagging the demographic data. So where else is the pipeline coming from? In this case, and as an aggregate, there's a 1.4 times talent gap. And it's all about competitiveness. If you're running a nation or a country or a city or a company, you will need to stay competitive with a workforce that actually is the one driving growth. And yes, in politics, we have a lot of work to do. And there's plenty of data and pledges and initiatives right now. I'm sure many of you are probably championing some of these. Please keep doing it. But it probably needs to start earlier, now that you saw that the Gen Zs are ruling the world of workplace and they are already majority minority. Therefore, our interventions or process may be a little bit different if that's who they are. And talking about Gen Zs, I think they will change the world. They are already doing so. They are already declaring loud and proud that they're more likely to buy from companies that are actually socially conscious more than any of us. They're tech positive. To them, this thing of digital is not like some novelty that you personalize for just one special project. It's just a way of life. And they can see it actually as a positive, lever for connectedness. But at the same time, they feel a sense of mistrust and pessimism that we had never seen before, especially towards government leaders. Now, if these generations are the future and are already going into society with this sense of mistrust, what is our role? Is it their fault that they don't trust us, or is it us not reaching across the generational aisle in this case? Because they don't believe governments have the necessary tools to help them. There's opportunity because there is growth. And when there is growth, there is potential. And entrepreneurship also, number 5, as the mega trend before COVID, was booming. And you know what the irony is, and this just speaks of human resilience, even in the middle of COVID, the entrepreneurial rates and growth rates of new business creation have been like outpacing what the numbers were in 2019. So even despite all the catastrophe that COVID has represented for, yes, many businesses that have shut down, we are seeing an increase as high as 24% in new business creation. Now, why do I mention that to you? Because once again, you know the economics, the job creators, the people that keep a block or a city alive are our small businesses. Now, how are our policies or interventions or programs designed to make sure that we're tapping into this desire for progress, even in the midst of crisis or the fears of economic recession? So here you have it. As leaders, all of us here in this room, it's pretty simple. You're a very smart audience. Come on, we're in the Kennedy School. This is where the world leaders are trained to do greatness. Well, let me tell you, with all of that and many more, I just gave you 5. It is mathematically impossible to achieve your full potential in impact, in societal transformation, in economic growth, in business progress. Mathematically impossible to achieve any of that without an inclusive approach to your design and your strategies and your executions. I will stand in front of anyone with the numbers, and you can cut it in different ways. This is not just an American ethnicity thing. It's gender, it's class, it's aging. How can we tap into the full dimension of potential without doing this completely with an inclusive and culturally intelligent lens? So here you have it. There is no full impact on growth without inclusivity, period. And again, I will stand in front of anyone to argue it. And now I'm curious how you feel about that, right? I told you we were going to be interacting together as a group. What trend or insight of everything that I just shared, I'm wondering, surprised you? Maybe you want to be an overachiever and even tell us why. Because this already starts showing the ahas, hopefully, in the physical room and the virtual room that we're sharing today. So I'm going to give us 60 seconds so that you can maybe play back to all of us in this virtual room what trend or insight surprised you and why. Yes, women business owners and the power it represents. 50% of the population, 40% of registered businesses, outpacing new business creation. Then where else is the economic power if not with women? Thank you. Entrepreneurship growth. Keep them coming. I'll give us another 10 seconds. So much Gen Z. I'm telling you, they rule the world. And you know what? Their consciousness and global connectedness gives me so much hope for the world. Sofia Vergara is the highest paid actress I know. $43 million. Not too bad. A year, roughly. Excellent. Thank you so much. Keep them coming and don't close it because I told you we're going to keep on using that. All right. So clearly, many things happen in BC, but we know that COVID happened. We've all learned a whole lot. Leaders around the world, and there's been disruption in health. There's been all kinds of economic turmoil and a lot of stats that maybe get us all motivated to do more, right? Whether it is unemployment or pay gap or how women have been more affected than other segments, and clearly social justice and tensions around the topic of equity, diversity, and inclusion in a way we had never seen before. This is the context we're in. Welcome. Yes, but with crisis, there is opportunity. I think there's a quote from Einstein that says that. So I'm inviting us all to think of a new approach, because it cannot be business as usual, right? And I just introduced you to this very simple yet powerful definition of cultural intelligence. We've known for many, many years and decades or more that great leaders need, of course, the preparation intellectually, the IQ, of course, the ability to have the empathy in the way they interact with each other, with partners, constituents, EQ. But cultural intelligence is not just about the altruistic feeling that comes from being nice and empathetic with those that may be different from you. Remember the definition. It's the ability to be aware of, understand, and apply. Now, that is a little bit much more than having a listening session or a great diversity and inclusion training where people learn stuff. That gets you stuck in awareness. And for those of you that are visual learners like me, I mean, I'm Latin, I'm going to make you dance no matter what. This is my own like impact Macarena. You have to first get to the heart before the mind, before the impact. Heart, mind, impact, or for those of you in the world of business, heart, mind, wallet, in that order. And that calls for a discipline, which I know is exactly aligned with what you're studying as part of this program. To really, really have the competence and the data and the insights. So your everyday design, implementations, executions of policies or programs or business strategies, don't skip steps. You can go into application, but you didn't know what was really the heart of the matter. You skipped the potential to have that humanity first. If you go just into understanding and the numbers and you show up with an amazing thesis of the case for action in a business case format full of the charts and what it could be, you're missing out on the human potential. And if that's all you do without a plan, it has no application. You see what I mean? So don't forget, I'm going to invite you to dance the impact Macarena, heart, mind, wallet, or heart, mind, impact, embedded into everything you do. And when I say everything, it's everything. Now, this is one of those charts that may really motivate you or kind of like make you scratch your head and be like, oh no, this is much more complicated than I thought. Because, inclusion is inclusive, and inclusivity is not just about, being empathetic of differences in people's genders and all of that. It has to do too in understanding an inclusive ecosystem in which you decide to conduct either business or government or your non-for-profit efforts. And there's more than one constituent, right? You know it. I know you've heard this from Aries already. You are employers, no matter what. So there is an inward responsibility to the talent and the people in the workforce. You are places of work. So it starts from the inside out. And yes, there are people that you serve, citizens, communities, stakeholders. Absolutely. Your inclusive approach to workforce and citizen engagement must be there with the heart at the center. However, how many times have you really deployed or assessed how inclusive is your approach to public and private partner engagement? Who am I paying sponsorships for? Who is in my roundtable task force? Who are the types of organizations that I choose to co-create things with? Do they even look like the citizens and communities that I am intending to serve? And also, who are you doing business with? I showed you the numbers of government contracting amongst women, firms, big gaping hole of 2x. Well, inclusion is inclusive, and an inclusive impact ecosystem takes into consideration the inside out, not just a one-dimensional HR view. And that's what it takes to truly be culturally intelligent in a holistic way. All right, you're probably scratching your heads. Gee, that's a lot of work. But yes, we talk about human centricity. The world of tech is obsessed with user design, design thinking that starts with empathy and puts the user at the center and all this stuff. But you cannot have the personalization of interventions and design and everything without knowing the person. And there are many ways to get to know people, right? Surveys and polls and many traditional methods. You can ask a neighbor, but we know that there's some tide waves that are shifting even the way people feel altogether. No surprise here with the Great Resignation, for example, as one of those things that is shifting and changing people. And yes, a lot of people have quit their jobs, and it's continuing to happen. Maybe more so in North America or the US than in other places, but it's still a thing, right? But here's the funny thing, because we humans are interesting creatures. There is already a boomerang effect happening where I would like for us to kind of switch our mindset from, Great Resignation and all of that, to really calling us all to rethink the great onboarding. How are we welcoming back people to the workforce and being open to boomerang employees? Because there's a lot they have to offer. Because this is happening, by the way. Plenty of research. By the way, you're getting this deck, so maybe you can click on some of the links and really read out some of these articles, but there is a boomerang effect. So this notion of inclusion in that workforce part of the bubbles that I showed you, 360, probably needs a new lens of intelligence and insight. And I'm just going to give you a sliver of some things that we have found with our work using CulturIntel, which is our proprietary technology that scrapes and harvests every open digital discussion anywhere it's happening, not just in social media, but everywhere, to really look at the context and how people engage with a conversation so that we can cluster the themes and identify insights. So again, we're harvesting everything, organizing it for topics, tonality, psychographics, and reporting it back. And I'm going to give you just a sneak peek of some numbers. If you're interested to get more of this full study, happy to share it. We ran this for the social good of society, by the way, so it's not paid by any particular client. So I would love for you to have this just to reference. Now, 28 million digital discussions or voices of people tell us a lot. And back to my point of personalization, to be aware of and understand, you need intelligent insights to embed it into your everyday business. You can see here that is not social media where people are talking, and that's barely 12%. Message boards, topical sites like, Reddit and Quora and Indeed and, Upwork. That is where people in an unbiased and unsolicited way show up and say what they're feeling without being asked a question. Well, I'm just going to give you a sliver. Remember, I'm just giving you teasers here so that we can think broader. But in the case of ethnic insights, as it relates to the workplace, and once again, why are we doing this? Not to check the box of compliance, but if the majority of my future workforce is going to be diverse, I better know what gets to the heart of them so that I'm effective in attracting and retaining the workforce I need. Now, for the Hispanic cohort, we saw that a top leading driver to the workplace and to staying engaged or recognizing that that's a good opportunity is having a supportive culture, 1.4 times more than anyone else. So there's this social nature of who we are as Latinos, Hispanics that are looking for that togetherness. In the case of Black Americans, and this may be a little bit of maybe cynicism in the wake of diversity, equity, and inclusion and all things, Black Lives Matter, et cetera, but they're less likely than the overall to focus on missions as a workplace expectation. So it's like, show me opportunity. That's the currency. So the currency is not just, did the CEO put out a statement in support of our Black communities, but it's like, okay, show me those that are in the board room that look like me, and what is the career succession plan for somebody like me when I join you? Very different, higher level of accountability. And in the case of Asian Americans, what our data suggested, again, 28 million digital discussions analyzed, about a third of the conversations were about compensation. So there is something about the value that is on that piece of paper and in that offer that auto match with how that perceived value of this professional, is evaluating offers. What if you just have a one strategy fits all? It won't work. And this is why cultural intelligence in data matters. This is fascinating to me, unlike what we just read there with our fellow Asian Americans. Millennials and Gen Zs are the least focused segment in regards to compensation. So there is equity and value on something else, which may call us to design offers through this lens, knowing that Gen Zs and millennials are going to make up 75% of the workforce by 2050. So they are more likely on the left-hand side with millennials to prioritize work-life flexibility. So good luck for those of you that may be declaring so bold and strong, we will not be a hybrid workplace, because it's probably here to stay. And you may be missing out on a big piece of the workforce that is driving the growth. And then Gen Zs are also looking for those opportunities for growth. You see what happens? Not a one size fits all, but without the data, we may be making blind or incomplete assumptions and decisions. And what's so funny too, recently, you are the second audience ever to see these numbers, by the way. Super exciting. We decided to look at why are people regretting quitting their jobs, because we're seeing boomerang employees, right? And we actually identify the following regrets. People are regretting leaving because they went somewhere and were like, gee, the culture doesn't really align. So the grass wasn't as green as they thought. They missed the people, or they missed their high paying job. A lot of people said, I'm going to go independent. I'm going to be a freelance. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I kind of like my high paid job. And maybe they felt there were no opportunities in this new company. So when you rank it for overall, this is the pecking order of those regrets. Is it different for men versus women? Let's look at the guys real quick here. The biggest bubble was they went somewhere else and realized, you know what? This culture doesn't really align with me, and I'm not really liking the environment. Followed by the fact that I miss my high paying job. You see that big yellow bubble to the top left, and then you see the rest there. Surprise, surprise, here's what it is for women. Completely different driver for regret. We as women, again, according to 94,000 digital discussions analyzed, said that we miss the people and community. And followed by this culture that I went to doesn't align with me. And look how teeny tiny, right or wrong, ladies, but this is what the data says, how teeny tiny missing a high paying job is really playing into what we saw here as the regrets for quitting. Once again, through the lens of gender, if we have this culturally intelligent information, then the way we deliberately design policies or ways to re-attract talent may emphasize different aspects of what you have to offer as an employer. Men or women, after all, some are from Mars and the others from Venus. Here we go again. It's confirmed. And the barriers for entering also changed through the lens of ethnicity. Very interesting. This is particularly to the tech sector, a sector that is highly competitive. The overall population says, you know what? I don't seem to get access to the interviews, and maybe I have self-doubt because maybe I'm not as qualified for what this big high-paying tech job is looking for. But then when you look at Hispanics, they are prioritizing other things that are not feeling inadequate. It's hiring bias, not having a mentor that can give you like the inside scoop and intel, and the fact that this place just seems unwelcoming, period. You see the difference from inward barriers, self-doubt, maybe I don't have the qualifications, to outward systemic barriers that in the voice of the people, unsolicited, it's ranking barriers to entry completely different. We could go on and on with this information, by the way, but at the end of the day, it's up to you and us to do something with this enlightenment or the awareness and understanding so we can apply it back to the three verbs of cultural intelligence, because otherwise there's no ROI. And I don't want us to think of ROI as we're taught in business school. Sure, that's important, return on inclusion. You want to put your effort and get something out of it that makes sense. But in this case, is the power of return on inclusion, because not doing it based on all those numbers turns into return on ignored. And we don't want that, because how else are you going to grow or win elections or make an impact in society if that's what's happening with the numbers? And guess what? There's many companies and places that are doing great stuff. We've had the great pleasure working with MSC now for, almost 6 years. But you know what? Instead of focusing on quotas or supplier diversity metrics, even the branding of that entire effort is called the Global Economic Inclusion effort, where it's all tied to propelling and passing the wealth and the growth to those with capabilities that can deliver better health and better business impact, in this case for MSD. So you're saying my friend Raul here, who basically says unapologetically, I see opportunity everywhere. And it changes the energy and dialogue from it being to, did you hit your supply diversity quota, to, are you contributing with the full potential of economic inclusion, and plotting it out and actually measuring it as such. There's other interventions out there. This one is, a few years back, but it's still relevant. BNY Mellon, when they saw that millennials and younger people are not as interested in financial services, well, how about implementing reverse mentoring, where young employees are actually advisors to the executive team? Any of us have the capacity to do that. My gosh, governments can benefit greatly from these type of millennial or youth councils, but not just to listen and have a round table, really for them to evaluate the strategies and prioritization of what you think it's important, because they probably have a different pulse. Here's another example. You heard it in my introduction. I went to a teeny tiny school when I came to the States. I always say, and I tell the students there, it doesn't matter that you are in a town of 3,000 people in Keene, Texas, but this little but mighty school ranks number 2 nationwide on social mobility. How? How is that even possible? Social mobility is your ability to only not just recruit students that are first-time college, students, so first ones to go to college in their family, but they complete with great grades and satisfactory, and actually have a job before they even graduate. Now, that doesn't happen by osmosis, and it's a small school that has focused efforts in something they call the Office of Student Success. They have received so much funding from the federal government and the state government because they can see and quantify that the investment of the Center for Academic Success and Advising, that literally teams up one student with one advisor, especially in that first year of success, is enough for that social mobility and graduation rate to skyrocket. More than 40% of their graduates are Hispanic, the majority of them first-time college students. Interventions that are intentional and well-funded. And then here's another fun one. I'll finish with this example. I'm sure you've read the news. It's a country that is near and dear to my heart, New Zealand. And their prime minister, who has been known and recognized for her very, open and diverse and innovative views of the world, said, I'm done with GDP. How about the GNH, the Gross National Happiness Index, and an actual measure that embodies the health, well-being, and yes, economic prosperity of people. So we may need to redefine as well where cultural economics are plotted and why, because there's different inputs to capital, natural capital, financial capital, human capital, and social capital, that when combined, really give you a new proxy for measuring the well-being of in this case, a country. So promoting well-being and prosperity. Yes, you can pursue capital with consciousness. That's why there's a big movement of social capitalism. And we need to understand that one is not the enemy of the other. They can work for the well-being, the GNH of society, for all to thrive. If you want to play around with it, by the way, there's places and websites where you can kind of build your own, and it's super fun. Anyhow, we're going to land this plane because I want to hear from you. This is not about culture, not about color and ethnicity and labels. If you're spending too much time in your meetings debating labels, I know there's been a lot of contention with Latinx, for example, for us, you're probably spending too much time on the things that maybe are not going to deliver on that cultural economics that we're talking about. If you should be spending your time on really debating how much investment, focus, metrics, solutions am I putting forward? Because this is not a program, it's a mindset. And it's a mindset because it doesn't matter how diverse your team looks. If the culture is not there as a mindset for sharing and really welcoming an inclusive perspective, it may not be as inclusive after all. And please be kind with yourselves because it's a marathon and not a sprint. Companies or organizations are in different stages of this ladder. You can probably self-describe where you're at. You're not ignoring, because otherwise we wouldn't be here. Some people are just doing little pilots, they're learning, they're testing, but really you start investing and innovating when those decisions upstream in policy design and budget allocations, in the way your team interacts with each other, is embedding cultural intelligence upstream. And many of us also jump to the conclusion of let's create an affinity group or an advocacy group. Those are great. Don't get me wrong. I created one at J&J called HOLA, but also resist the temptation to get stuck in it being a socializing group, or maybe the advocacy group that all it's doing is maybe bringing forward listening sessions, or let's network with each other like almost we're talking to ourselves, to really being perceived and welcomed as a resource group for innovation and transformation. where you are bringing constituent expertise, you have executive sponsorship, and can actually influence budgets and decisions. Otherwise, it's just a social club. All right. So rallying cry, let's graduate from diversity for the sake of representation to inclusion for the sake of innovation and impact. Many of us work on diversity programs. I would like to X that. I actually have a love-hate relationship with the word diversity, not because I don't believe in it, but it's because many times it gets put into the small box of representation. We need to be programming for a diverse world, not just doing diversity programs. We need to also go from inclusion to help the economy and well-being of some to economic inclusion and well-being that impacts all, and that's fundamentally different, so that you can truly go from the theory into the action of application. Some 3 final words: heart, mind, impact. Remember the Macarena? Heart, mind, wallet, heart, mind, impact. Get to the heart by learning and understanding what really matters to the people you serve. And sometimes that is an experience and not just reading a report. I know COVID has placed all kinds of restrictions. Look at us, we could be together. But I invite you to have the cultural curiosity to actually experience the places and spaces that you think you want to impact, because there's no report that will ever give you the feeling of living culture instead of reading culture. Then with that, nerd out on the numbers. Why not? There is a business case and maybe a reframing of why this matters to begin with. And with that humanity first and then backed by the numbers, it makes any opinion just be an opinion. Know the numbers, the needs, the insights, and that will guide you to point the flashlight where there is opportunity. And last but not least, just do it. You may be thinking, gee, Lili, I don't have enough money for this, or somebody else holds the keys to that office of the budget, etc. Well, a small test and learn can prove the point. And sometimes it's just the way we choose to show up into the meeting, the dialogue, the roundtable differently. Heart, mind, wallet. And there you have it. I'm going to invite you to do a pledge. You probably didn't realize I was going to do this, but why not? If there was a room that could change the world, I know it's this one. So if you could say, all right, Lili, I get it. There's the numbers. There is not a program, it's a mindset. And it's a bigger dialogue that transcends the altruistic nature of it. What do you think you could do to activate your own power of cultural intelligence? Maybe starting today, maybe starting in that meeting that you have tomorrow, or even in the way you show up in the rest of this course, or with your students and your professors and the people you get to influence. What is it that we could do? And all of a sudden, this cloud, this is always my favorite. Please, everyone, as many of you as you can, give me some of your takes here, because it's the moment of truth, insight thinking, get out of Cambridge. That's funny, but it's so true. You'll be surprised how many super senior executives that we work with in New York City had never been to like Roosevelt Avenue in Queens. And I'm like, how are you going to understand the shoppers that you serve if we don't go walk the streets? So thank you for being so honest and saying that. Be more patient. I mean, there's so much. By the way, if you want to get out of Cambridge and not have to go too far, go up to Lawrence and have some really good Dominican food. There you go. Yes. that is just did a happy dance. I know she did. Yes. Thank you so much. And with that, I am just humbled to be here. I know there's a lot of information to decode. You've heard from great speakers. You're in great hands with Edie's and the rest of the faculty. And I just hope that this sparked a whole new level of thinking as you continue in this journey and path for inclusion. So thank you so much. And I'm going to stop now because I want to hear from you all.